And joining us in the studio this morning, we have got the Minister for Health and also Alcohol Policy, Steve Edgington. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Katie, and good morning to all the listeners up here in Darwin.
Good to have you on the show from Sky News, the Bureau Chief for the Northern Territory. Northern Australia, is it, Matt?
Northern Australia, yes.
Northern
I was in Townsville late last year.
Oh,
yep.
Spend most of your time in the Northern Territory, where it really matters, hey?
That's right.
And Selena Rubo, the Opposition Leader, good morning to you.
Good morning, Katie, and your listeners, and a big shout out to everyone in K-Town.
Lovely to have you all in the studio today. And I tell you what, I can't remember a week that's been as busy when it comes to Parliament. There has been so much going on around the place. And late yesterday, the Northern Territory's anti-corruption watchdog released the long-awaited findings from an investigation into alleged Labor misuse of taxpayer funds in the lead-up to the 2020 election. Making no adverse findings against any individual. However, the report found, it's the final report, I should say, of this Operation Jupiter Part 2. It was tabled into Parliament yesterday afternoon, and the report followed allegations concerning former Labor Chief Minister Michael Gunner and his ministerial staff, who were referred to the ICAC amid claims of improper conduct by ministerial staff leading up to the 2020 Northern Territory general election. Now, these investigations have confirmed that in the months leading up to the 2020 election, officers within the office of the Chief Minister, and in particular the digital unit, performed political campaign work within normal office hours and while being paid from the public purse. Now, I've got to tell you, this is exactly the kind of thing that makes Territorians furious. You know, the thought of being paid on the taxpayer's dime to try and win an election. I think a lot of us could pretty well see what was going on at the time. I mean, Matt, I know you and I had probably had discussions about it, at that time in the lead into the election, because there was things like, there was different posts, there was different stuff happening that you kind of go, well, hang on a second, I'm not sure that this passes the pub test, for one, but, does it pass actually like codes of conduct and the way in which you should be conducting yourself in your work hours when you're meant to be following out as a job as a public servant?
Yeah, and obviously the ICAC has now found that things were not done properly and in line with how they should be. There's this, I don't know whether grey area is the right word, but there's always been this crossover, right, where political staff then, when it gets into campaign mode, basically go and campaign, and they're told to campaign. Like, it's no secret, but they're not supposed to do it in work hours on the taxpayer dime. Like, if you work for a government minister, you're the chief of staff to the transport minister or whatever, it would not be unsurprising for you to be told, well, hey, on Saturday you're going out door knocking, which is a party political thing to do.
Yep.
But they've clearly broken the rules here, because they were doing things during work hours, and they were publishing social media posts, etc., that were clearly party political, that were being done, as that they were there in their role as a paid government staff member, paid by the taxpayer, yet they were doing party political things.
Well,
and this, of course, follows the flight drama.
That's exactly right. Well, but my big question here is, I mean, with something like this and looking into the social media side of things, this is where you can go back and there's a digital footprint, right? So this is the stuff that you can go back and find. What about the stuff that you can't? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you go, trust me, I know, because I've actually worked in a ministerial office many years ago.
So you're saying we should trust should we trust them when they say, oh no, these couple of social media posts, that was the only thing that was done. We didn't make any phone calls, we didn't do any lobbying. Remember in the flight, in the ICAC report into the flights, it was like it had actually been locked into the diary and stuff, how they were going to do it, that those flights were there to coincide with when the voting was happening in those remote communities.
But look, trust me, again, I'm not stupid enough to think that it only happens under one political party. And in this instance, obviously, Michael Gunner's been caught with his pants down, for want of a better way of putting it. I mean, Selena, it's pretty dreadful. It's a pretty ordinary situation that staff members who are public servants that that are not supposed to be doing that stuff during work hours are absolutely campaigning to try and win you an election during work hours, getting paid, by the taxpayer.
Katie, this is why our former Labor government did bring in the ICAC to investigate matters like this. I'm determined as the new leader of the Labor Party to make sure that we don't repeat any of the mistakes of the past, of any of the leaders or any of the things that were done. So we fully adopt and agree with the recommendations. Obviously, the first report that was released by the ICAC in June 2024, the former Chief Minister, Eva Lawler, took on those recommendations and immediately started to implement some of those changes. Obviously, we've had an election since then. This is now report number 2, and I'm now the leader of the Labor Party, and I absolutely accept all the recommendations. We don't want to see that. I know Territorians don't want to see bad government, and anything to do with that balance and what Matt's saying, the political and the responsibility as a paid government worker. We want to make sure that there's a clear separation of that, and we don't need to repeat those mistakes of the past.
And I think, Katie, looking at what Matt said, if you go back to the travel as well, the previous report that highlighted some of the travel routes that were going on back then. But this, again, just shows, and when you put both of those reports together, what it shows is that the travel routes, the use of taxpayers' money to... I think the report spoke about the IT people putting together a whole lot of political campaign material, but this reflects very poorly on Michael Gunner. He was the Chief Minister at the time, there's no doubt about that. But moving forward, we're very clear coming into government that these issues need to be stamped out. That's why we've brought in a new ministerial code of conduct, and we want to reinforce transparency, accountability in public office. So,
Steve, I want to believe you. I want to believe every political party. I want to believe you too, Selena. But unfortunately, I've been around long enough to know that after a period of time, behaviour, unfortunately, seems to deteriorate. I'm sure you probably think the same thing, Matt.
It does. I love new governments and their commitment to openness and transparency, I've got to say. We heard it from Michael Gunner.
How many times did you hear it from Michael Gunner?
They tabled a whole 36-page document on it,
restoring integrity.
And then broke every one of the rules that they wrote for themselves.
And people wonder why I'm gun-shy,
And I would like to think that this administration is going to be different. And it's early days, Steve, and you're going all right so far. But let's come back in 3 years and see how it goes.
Well, that's right.
But Katie, we have put those in place now, and we are committed to accountability and transparency.
Did you get that?
Yep, we've got that.
I got that.
I'll play that in 2028, Katie.
You've just got to go back to 2016, and the biggest issue that has hounded Labor for the last 8 years was that document restoring integrity in government, and that was the Bible for the Labor government, and there wasn't too much that was followed in that document.
I mean, did it change the outcome of an election, though? No, what was going on?
No, it didn't. No, what changed the outcome of the election was law and order and the economy.
I mean, you mean back in 2020 with this report, or no?
Sorry. I thought you were talking about the 2024 election. Did it change? Look, I don't know. Maybe had some. Probably not. Were those Bush seats close? I can't remember. Oh, yeah, you won by 5 votes. Well, but you won. If you'd lost, and if Bill had lost, because his was close as well, wasn't it?
It was 17, I think.
Then maybe, but the CLP still won those seats.
Yeah.
But I think, what is interesting to me in this report, and there's a line from one of the staffers who was interviewed from the ICAC, right, who said that they were told by the senior staff, you're this is how it goes. You're expected to door knock, you're expected to do all this party political stuff. but make sure you do it on your own time, quote unquote. Now, as this staffer has said to the ICAC, that's just an arse-covering exexercise because you're not expected to do that at all.
No.
I think the expectation is that you do it all the time in government time. 3 weeks out from an election, your expectation is you're doing everything to get your party, your minister re-elected.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how you fix that.
Well, I don't know, but one thing that I am very sure of is people have had a gutful of it. They expect politicians to be open. They expect you to be honest, to use the words that we hear from pollies all the time. And they don't want that taxpayer money to be wasted on trying to get them re-elected. I know that obviously this week we have seen the lobbying register also introduced into Parliament. It's going to see the publishing, as I understand it, of ministers. Labor wants the register to be strengthened by the publishing of ministers' diaries quarterly. What we know is that there's sort of, I guess you've got to make sure that that you are noting who you're meeting with, and if they are a lobbyist. I don't know. To me, I kind of read through it and I was like, well, hang on a sec. The unions aren't included on there. The different, different sort of
different
groups
bodies.
aren't included in there.
It's quite strange, Katie. There's no detail into what that criteria is and what sets out. I mean, we asked some questions this week of the Chief Minister, Leif Nokiara, around where's the detail and the plan around that lobbyist register, because it came out of press release, I think, on the Monday. No detail who administers it, who is going to keep an eye on it, how it's going to be updated, and the website's not even up and running yet. Apparently you can apply for a paper application at the moment, so I just thought that was a bit strange to say, we've ticked off an election commitment, but there's no detail, and if you want to apply as a lobbyist here, come get this piece of paper and submit
Katie,
it to us somehow.
Quite right. The detail... Katie, the detail is there. The fact is that we have introduced the lobbyist register. I actually went on there this morning. There's already two people or organisations registered. I had a very close look at that. So it's very important that those parties do register as a lobbyist. Look, we do meet with various people every day of the week, and the Leader of the Opposition would know that there's various people that come through your office.
Well, I guess that's my question. Can somebody just come and meet with you and be lobbying
the
you?
list? That's what we don't understand, Katie.
Is the local sporting group a lobbyist? Are they a lobbyist by coming in to talk to and share information?
Sometimes it depends on what they're asking for too, does it?
Well, that's a really good question.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, because everyone effectively is a lobbyist,
that's
right?
The thing. Everyone's
if it's the local footy club who wants new change rooms, or it's some bloke working for the tobacco industry who wants to change the tax law, there's still people who are trying to lobby the government to get something out of them, right?
What we want to do is capture those lobbyists that are there for a specific purpose, to try and influence policy, to try and influence change. Yes, we do have people coming through the door that might need some assistance to help run a sporting club or a not-for-profit organisation. Because they come in and share information with us, we've got to do, and I suppose make decisions around what's best. What's the best way to use money? What's the best way to support those not-for-profit groups? But when it comes to those lobbyists, they're the ones that need to be registered. They're the ones that need to be made public so that the public is aware of who they are and what they're doing.
So we're going to have every lobbyist joining a sporting club saying that they're coming in to talk about a grandstand, then at the end asking a few questions about their other interests.
Publishing the ministerial diaries would be helpful, because then you could see any connection if a decision's been made about an injection of money or support or resources for a sporting group, as an example, what we're talking about now. Then you would see that correlation, that link. Oh, well, they met in January of 2025, and then they got their money at the budget in May. So you would see a bit of a record, but that would provide that ability to be open around who's met, who has then received a benefit from that meeting.
Now that happens in other states, doesn't
it? Does, yeah. We're not reinventing the wheel when we're suggesting that, Katie. We can take the best bits of other jurisdictions and put it together to make sure it suits the Northern Territory, but we don't get that at the moment with what the CLP's released this week, unfortunately.
The important thing, Katie, is that just going back to that Restoring Integrity in Government document that Labor put out in 2016. You've only got to go to that and look at the discussion around lobbyists back then. And it was interesting, in Parliament this week, I heard one of the Labor members say that, if we were in government this time, we would introduce a lobbyist register. Well, they had 8 years to introduce a lobbyist register.
We actually committed to it in the previous election.
There was a commitment back in 2016. There was discussion about it. The fact is that Labor never introduced it. They had an opportunity to do it. What we've done is got on with the job. We've introduced the lobbyist register so that those third-party lobbyists are on the register. People can see who they are, and understand some of the work that's going on.
But Steve, why do a half job if this is a chance to make sure that what we have in the Territory can be robust and that Territorians can have faith in us regardless of who's in government? Why not just make that at the starting point and put all that detail in, get the best bits from other jurisdictions and make sure that we can all just move on?
Look,
why not just start it all now? Why just do a half-assed job?
The reality is that we've looked at what's happening in other jurisdictions. We've put the third-party lobbyist register there, something that Labor never did over 8 years. We're moving ahead with openness and transparency.
I hope none of the paper applications get lost in the mail, Katie.
Well, the website's up and going, and as I said, there's already 2 lobbyists on there already. So watch this space. I'm sure that'll increase. We're being open and transparent about who we're engaging with.
Did you guys used to have problems with the Post, did you, Selena?
Oh, I think that I love the Australia Post, but if a lobbyist says that they've put in their application and it's not received, then what's going to happen then? That'll make a whole other can of worms, Katie, for everybody.
We will take a very quick break. You're listening to Mix 104.9's 360. It is the week that was. Well, you are listening to the week that was. If you've just joined us in the studio with us today, we've got the opposition leader, Selena Rubo. We've got Matt Cunningham from Sky News, and we've got Steve Edgington, who is indeed the Minister for Health and also Alcohol Policy. Now, we saw this week some corrections staff converge on Parliament House, quite concerned about the legislative amendments that did pass through Parliament overnight into the Correctional Services Act to give the Corrections Commissioner the power to appoint special corrections officers and special probation and parole officers. The amendments are being made in an effort to support the core corrections workforce. As I've said sort of numerous times throughout the week, unfortunately those corrections staff do not seem real happy about it, and they've then been at Parliament House throughout the week to try and have their voices heard. We've also heard, though, throughout the week, what it's actually meant is that different programs, including, and this is one that's upset quite a few people that listen to the show, a mowing service that's actually provided to Territory seniors by low security prisoners. It's had to be canned indefinitely as a result of the massive prisoner numbers. So there's so many different ways that we're seeing the influx of prisoners to our correctional facilities sort of having an impact on infrastructure, obviously, on staffing. We also know, though, now some of those programs are not able to happen. There is no doubt that by and large, what we hear here at work every day is people are very glad that those that are breaking the law, particularly in quite serious crimes, that they are not on the streets and that they are behind the wire if they're breaking the law. But the impact, I guess, on corrections has been quite astronomical.
Yeah, Katie, we know that the corrections officers have been extremely distressed this week in particular by not having been consulted about that urgent legislation that was brought in by the CLP government. It was passed just yesterday when we were in Parliament House by the CLP. They were calling to meet with the Corrections Minister, Gerard Maley, to sit down with him, to talk to him about what affects them, what ideas that they have, what concerns that they have. And Gerard Maley was gutless. He absolutely refused to meet with them face-to-face, Katie. All they wanted to do was to meet with their minister, who was there to advocate for them and support them, and the frustration. So they came to Parliament House on Tuesday, Katie, to be heard, to be seen. And Gerard Maley sat in the chamber and did not look up at them once when they were in the gallery. And I thought that was, to me, a big turning point in my lack of respect now for him because of that one moment. You know, normally if you're a minister, you would go out, you would talk to the people that you represent in that department, those public servants like our corrections officers who often people don't see. So they thought this was so important that they needed to go to Parliament to make their point, to meet with their minister and tell the government that they were unhappy with this legislation because they had heard of it all secondhand and without any consultation. So I saw all of that unfold this week, Katie. We spoke about the legislation yesterday. We had some very short time frames to be able to actually look at that legislation and the impact. We asked the questions that we needed in opposition. It did still pass yesterday, and it'll be interesting to see what happens now.
Yeah, Katie, look, I think the reality is that the minister has met with the union, I think at least twice. If you only got to go back to the 11th of November, it was clear that the minister met with the head of the union. There was discussion there about the shortage of staff.
Well, I think the commissioner tried to meet with the union. It lasted about 8 minutes. Now, Erin earlier had said to me on the show that that they weren't getting that they weren't happy with what was going on.
But
Well,
because people want to meet with their
there's
decision
issues
makers,
about-
that's the minister, Katie. That's the
I think there's
minister.
issues about not being happy, but it's about sitting down and having that conversation. So there were attempts made by the Commissioner to sit down with the union. Certainly the Minister has met with Erina early back on the 11th of November. And it's interesting to see that conversation focused around the shortage of correctional officers. Now, finding a solution to improve the working conditions for staff and to improve the workforce and the level of workforce should give them some comfort that we are working towards finding a solution to the shortage of staff. Now, we've already spoken about the mowing services being lost. Now, this really gets down to a shortage of staff. We spoke about the prison industries yesterday and the work programs that are inside prisons. Katie, they haven't operated either because of the shortage of staff. That hasn't been operating for a long, long time. Now, if we want to rehabilitate prisoners, both inside and out the prison, look, the Barclay work camp is a good model, but what we're seeing in the larger prisons in Alice and Darwin is that opportunity to build skills amongst prisoners has been lost because of Labor's failure to recruit sufficient staff and build the infrastructure that's needed. This escalating number of prisoners hasn't happened overnight. It's been a problem for the last 8 years. We've seen the escalating crime rates where DV, for example, 82% up right across the Northern Territory. The picture has been there for 8 years, but Labor failed to invest in the workforce and they failed to invest in the infrastructure that's needed to help rehabilitate our prisoners.
Katie, Government 101, if you're making decisions about people and particularly about people in a department, public servants, the 101 would be to meet with those public servants, those groups that you are making direct decision and impact, because that's their professional career, that is what they're concerned about, what our corrections officers are concerned about. So 101, and it was missed, and that's really what's caused a lot of the frustration and anger.
Well, Katie, 168,000 hours each year.
It equates to $11 million is what the Minister had told me on the show yesterday, $11 million in overtime. So I'd sort of asked, how much is it going to cost now to privatise those different areas, i.e. the transportation and the escorting of prisoners then to court, to hospital, that kind of thing. He said, well, that's commercial in confidence. They've obviously got to go through the contract, the procurement process or whatever. But it is a heck of a lot of money, $11 million in overtime. I mean...
But it's not just the money, Katie. It's the pressure that the staff are under, the hours that they're working. This is the critical part.
For sure.
It is big money, but when you've got staff working double shifts, coming in after a 7-hour break, 8-hour break, that's the sort of thing that we need to take a very close look at. What we want to do is ensure that the working conditions for staff are as good as they possibly can.
And that's why the Minister should meet with those staff and hear from them directly, Steve.
This is an issue that does go back quite a while. And I've seen previous reports that has that overtime bill for escorts and whatever else, like at almost double the number you're talking about. I've also seen reports from probably 3 or 4 years ago at that time saying that corrections were 70 staff short. Right, 70 officers short, correctional officers. And I know from a conversation I had with the former Commissioner, Scott McNair, not long before he died, that he went to the department and he said, we're 70 officers short, we need 70 more correctional officers. And they said, bad luck, champ.
Wow.
And so now we find ourselves in a situation where, We're clearly 70. We're more than 70 officers short, and they're trying to, obviously do all sorts of different things to try and fill this gap.
This is the issue, Katie, and as Matt highlights, this has been going on for a long time. Labor failed to address the staff shortages. We've come up with a solution. We've listened to the correctional officers. We've listened to the union about the staffing shortages. Here we are addressing the problem, giving the Commissioner the ability to recruit into those positions. He needs to be satisfied that anyone coming into those positions has the skills and qualifications necessary to perform the functions of that position.
That's, I guess, one of the other concerns that has been raised is people are worried that we're going to wind up with, essentially private security doing some of these roles and escorting what could be quite dangerous prisoners. But nonetheless, there's concerns around that, we've also got a situation, where the government is trying to juggle their budget with an enormous level of debt. But yesterday still came out and said, or actually this morning, I believe this official announcement's going to be made, that the public sector enterprise bargaining policy has locked in a competitive wage growth of 3% for our public servants. Jo Hersey she's issued a statement saying that there's not going to be a wage freeze for the public sector workers. They'll receive a 3% annual pay increase already factored into the territory budget. Any increase above 3% must be funded by real, bankable productivity improvements and work practice reforms. Existing enterprise agreements remain in place, ensuring salaries and entitlements are protected, and no back pay, sign-on bonuses or similar payments, ensuring a responsible approach to public finances. Look, it's going to be an interesting year because I think the police are due for, they're going through their enterprise bargaining agreement. I know that they've raised concerns about their retention bonus. So, like I say, the government's got a real juggle on their hands here because at this point in time, we know that we are, being in debt, and then there's, being in the kind of debt that we're currently in, where we really, you're going to struggle to negotiate some of these different agreements, I would suspect, when you don't have a lot of money up your sleeve.
Well, Katie, the fact is we have negotiated with the public service. That 3% increase, it's a very balanced outcome when you look at that because at the end of the day, it's what we have seen over the years is the cost of living. We've seen CPI increases. We've seen a whole range of increases. But what we have done is locked in that 3% increase, and that's balanced against cost of living pressures that we have seen over the years, but what we will see in the future. But the reality is that we've locked in that agreement with the public servants. We value the public servants, and it's important that we retain our public servants in the public service. We want to get the best possible outcomes for Territorians, and without a strong public sector, we're going to struggle to do that. So when we talk about reducing crime, rebuilding the economy and restoring our lifestyle, we're working with the public sector that we have, and we're moving on, and we'll be working with the police around some of those issues around the retention bonus as well.
And Katie, I know you mentioned the police retention bonuses. This was a promise that Leah Finocchiaro made 10 days out from the election last year on the 14th of August 2024 to police, that they would get a very clear and mandated retention bonus for 10 years of service, for 15 years of service, for 20 years of service, for 25 years of service, and for 30 years of service in the force. And we know that this will mean a lot for our police force. We asked the question to Leah Finocchiaro, who is also the police minister, in question time yesterday, why this retention bonus hasn't been rolled out yet to the police. It was supposed to be in the first 12 months. Would the honouring of those 5 tiers still be valid? That was the election commitment that Leah made and her team made. And now we're hearing from Leah, we heard it yesterday in question time, it was more of a proposal, and actually there'll be some more information later. It was a very clear election promise, Katie, to the police, to the hardworking police, that Leah made, and now we're hearing secondhand, Katie, just today that we hear that the CLP government is asking the police to pay for their own retention bonus, to pay for their political commitment made in August last year. And I don't think that this is a true commitment and being honest with Territorians when it comes to supporting our hardworking police.
I think it's a very strong commitment, Katie. And look, I have a background in policing, and as the leader of the opposition just said, we said that we would deliver it in the first 12 months. We're 6 months into government. So, look, what I would say is that the Chief Minister has been very clear about this retention bonus. She has had conversations with the Commissioner. We will be working with the Police Association to work out how best to deliver that retention bonus. There's still negotiations to go on. We want to make sure that we get this right. You can't say that we're being unclear about this. We're 6 months into we're 6 months into government. We said we would deliver this within 12 months. We're getting on with the job of working with the Commissioner and the Police Association to ensure that we have proper processes and proper bonuses in place to retain and attract people here to the Northern Territory.
Okay. What you promised, Steve, and it was in black and white before the election, was $10,000 for 10 years service, 15 for 15, and then $20,000 for 20, 25, 30, and every 5 years beyond. So is that what you're going to deliver?
At the moment, that's what we've committed to. We're having those conversations with the Commissioner. We're having those conversations with the Police Association.
If that's what you've committed to,
why
the need for the conversations?
The conversation is how best to fund that, and that they're the issues that need to be
So you've
discussed.
worked out you actually can't afford that? Is that what's going on?
We haven't worked out anything.
Well, they're asking police to pay for their own bonus.
What we're looking at is how much of that can come within the police budget, how much of that needs to come from additional funding.
So you are still committed to 10, 15, 20?
We are committed to delivering the
10, 15,
retention
20,
bonus.
the one that you promised?
That's right.
10, 15, 20.
Unless the association or the police commissioner tells us otherwise, that's what we've committed to. That's what we're working to deliver.
And Katie, I know the NTPA is very concerned that the proposal, apparently gone from an election commitment to a proposal now from Leah Finocchiaro as the police minister, has now dropped to $5,000 for those endpoints.
So that's my understanding
is
that it's what's now being proposed is $20,000 for 10 years service. You probably know this too, Wolfie.
Yep.
25 for 15, and then it drops down to 5 for 25. For 20, 25, 30 and beyond.
The big thing is when you make a commitment during an election campaign and you then, if you're not going to deliver on that, that's when people stop believing what you say. And that's, I think, a real risk that any government runs.
Look, we've made a commitment to deliver that retention bonus for police. We can get into discussion about a whole range of election commitments. What we do know is that Labor failed to deliver a number of election commitments over the 8 years.
But Steve,
that they were
Labor
in
didn't
government.
promise this
We
said that we would. What we've said is that we will deliver this within 12 months, and that's what we're going to do.
Well, and I hope so, because just because they
too.
didn't do something doesn't mean you guys should do the same, because that's exactly the kind of thing that Territorians were annoyed with under Labor.
What I'm saying is that we are delivering this election commitment. It's a bit rich for Labor to question whether we are delivering.
Don't worry about Labor. Don't worry about Labor. Let us question it, because what you've promised is really clear: 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. Is that what you're going to deliver?
And those conversations are happening with the Commissioner and the Police Association as we speak, so we can ensure that retention bonus retains our hard-working police officers, and it gives us the ability
Hate to gang up on you, Steve, but sometimes Matt and I do this, yes or no question.
Will police officers who've done 20 years service, will they get a $20,000 retention bonus? They will?
Yes.
Okay. Good. We've got that on the record.
Got it on the record.
Great.
It's clear.
We're happy for our police force that will happen.
I felt like we were back asking Joel Bowden whether he supported gas for a minute there.
You wouldn't have got a yes to that question.
We will take a very quick break. You are listening to Mix 104.9's 360. It is the week that was. You are listening to the week that was. There is really so much to discuss this morning, and I do just want to take you all to the beginning of the week, where we know yet another domestic violence death, a 41-year-old killed in Alice Springs on Sunday morning. We now know a 39-year-old alleged offender was obviously arrested by the police on Sunday morning. That person's been charged with murder over the death of his partner in Alice Springs. Now, we know that person, as I understand it, was due to front court, may have already fronted court. But there's been a lot of discussion then this week about domestic violence funding, and also some changes when it comes to police dealing with domestic violence. So new legislation introduced aimed at giving Northern Territory Police, I think it passed actually, more powers to arrest those who breach parole and to enforce compliance of domestic violence orders. Under the proposed laws, police are going to be able to enter a premises to arrest someone in breach of parole. They'll also be able to conduct alcohol and drug testing on anyone subject to a DVO on a private property. Now that includes people's yards and driveways, but officers won't be able to enter someone's home without consent. Now, there is no doubt that the way in which we're doing things when it comes to domestic violence needs to change. I mean, on Monday this week, we're talking nationally about closing the gap in so many different ways. Yet on that same morning, I was hearing discussions on a national stage, and not on Sky News, Matt. I know that you were definitely reporting on this horrendous, tragic incident. But I was hearing some national discussions, and there was no mention of the fact that a woman had been killed in a domestic violence incident 24 hours before. We want to talk about closing a gap.
It's actually bizarre, Katie, and I find it. Sometimes I think we live in a parallel universe to Canberra. Like, because we're sitting here and we know what's been happening and we witness what's happening, and then you see what happens on a day like that, and the conversation just seems so far removed from the one we're having. And I was actually doing. like I was covering Closing the Gap on
Yep.
Monday, and I was also covering the Chief Minister's speech in her press conference. And in her speech, she said there'd been an 82% increase in DV in the Northern Territory over the past 8 years, and of course there'd been that woman's horrific death on Sunday. And I mentioned that statistic on air on Monday, and like people at Sky News were just like, "Oh my, are you serious?" Like, and then they, they rightly made a very big deal of that.
Yep.
But it does seem that there is this two different worlds, it's almost, that we live in. And I think the other thing that's interesting to look at with Close the Gap, I mean, we keep talking about closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but I think there's a widening gap, and some people have made this point this week. There's a widening gap between Indigenous people who live in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane who are doing actually quite well, like an Indigenous middle class.
Yep.
And when they put out the Closing the Gap numbers, they're like, oh, we're improving in all these areas. Year 12 attainment, look at this. So I looked at Year 12 attainment yesterday. So Year 12 attainment, 68.1% nationally, not quite on track for Closing the Gap, but it's improving.
Yep.
Right. But it's 75% in Queensland, and it's 68% in New South Wales, and it's 72% in Victoria, and in the Northern Territory it's 40.2%.
Yeah, right.
So all of this, even the gains that we're making when it comes to closing the gap are not being made here in the Northern Territory. In the Northern Territory, in many instances, we're going backwards.
It's I don't know how to, I sort of don't know how to articulate myself well with this because, I felt really frustrated again on Monday morning when we're talking about closing the gap. And in addition to the tragic death of a 41-year-old woman, we also had a situation where a child under the age of 5 years old had been allegedly raped in a remote community at the end of last week. Now, I know that things like this can happen right around the nation. I get that, and I get that, it can happen no matter where you come from. But I think for me, every single week you're reporting on such horrific incidents, horrific incidents impacting the most vulnerable in our community. When I think of the most vulnerable, a child under the age of 5 and something like this happening, it doesn't only make my blood boil, it actually makes me want to cry. I think, how on earth do we live in a place where things like this can happen? And then, we know today this 19-year-old accused of this absolutely horrific crime, according to a report by Harry Brill in the NT News earlier in the week, that defendant, who obviously can't be legally identified at this stage, basically, they were applying, his defence lawyer applying for bail. The man's lawyer noted that the allegation was very serious, maintaining nothing in my submission is aimed at diminishing that, and he understands the seriousness of the situation. He's gone from having no interaction with the justice system at all to winding up in custody for quite some time. Now, my understanding is today we will find out whether he receives bail or not. But to me, we are talking about a child allegedly being raped. The fact that bail is even a discussion at this point, I'm quite surprised and lost for words.
Katie,
by that.
Katie, we need to start doing things differently. Hearing about the 41-year-old woman being killed, a child being raped, bail being considered for the offender. This has been going on for far too long. This is why we're committing record funding, around $36 million ongoing per year. What we need to do is do something differently. We hear these stories. We've heard these stories for years and years and years. What we need to do is start doing things differently. We're focused now with the Circuit Breaker program, focused on early intervention and prevention. What we need to be doing is targeting people at a very young age and intervening in that person's life at a very young age to try and keep that child, that family on track and change the behaviour of some of the people that we're seeing at the moment involved in these crimes. We have strengthened the bail laws, and looking at that particular case, that'll be a matter for the court. I don't want to interfere in the court process, but we have strengthened bail laws. We are looking at doing things differently. With that $36 million, we want to focus more on early intervention and prevention, but support the services that we have here in the Northern Territory.
Yeah, Katie, it is horrific when we hear those stories because it's not just removed and not connected to our community. It affects all of us here in the NT because of our small and tight-knit population. So there's no excuse for any of that type of action or behaviour. And, of course, you know, the horrific incident with the Territory woman who's died now in Alice Springs. It's the second woman in the Territory to die at the hands of their partner this year, Katie. So there definitely has to be a united front, and I've spoken many times on your show about this. I agree with Steve about the investment of funding. We want to see that continue to roll out, but I know Matt's written lots of articles on this. If this was happening in any other jurisdiction in the country, people would be outraged. And have we become desensitised to hearing these horrific stories? Like, we need to maintain that key focus, that highlight on making sure we continue to talk about what's happening in our community. We continue to talk about it being unacceptable, and we continue to talk about what other ways that we can work together to fix these horrific issues in the Territory.
They have to be. Like, we can't continue on in this way, and things do need to be done differently. I don't know exactly what the answers are, but we cannot continue on like this. But certainly the attention around these issues, we need to bring this to everybody's attention. And you know, Matt's here today, but I still go back to February 2018 when a 2-year-old was assaulted in Tennant Creek. That was a front page story. A front page story, and we're talking nearly 7 years ago. Today, as you've said, it barely features in the media about what's going on. So to hear about this latest sexual assault of a child, it's absolutely heartbreaking. The impact on that child, the impact on the family. We need to bring this to the spotlight. We need to address the root causes of these issues. That's why we're committing $36 million a year, and hopefully through early intervention and prevention, we will make a difference. Look, what I want to make clear is this isn't going to change overnight, but we're going to be doing our very best to make sure it does. Just to point on your front page story, and I know that you were at the forefront of the advocacy back then in 2018. There's little doubt about it. That became a front page story because I remember sending the question to David Speers, while the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was doing a press conference. And David Speers asked the Prime Minister at the time a question about the rape of that 2-year-old girl in Tennant Creek, and he basically blew him off and said it was a matter for the Northern Territory government. And the NT News, to its credit, did a front page story the next day that, with the headline, "Simply Does Not Care." That basically in regards to Malcolm Turnbull's response to that incident. To his credit, he eventually visited Tennant Creek, and there was a real focus on that for a short time. But as I say, it was for a short time. And you sort of get these little, you know, I think there's more focus, particularly on the DV issue. I reckon 10 years ago, there was nothing. Like, there was actually nothing. You know, it would almost not get reported at all. And there's been certainly more of a focus on reporting these issues. But still, to Selena's point, the 2 women killed in Alice Springs in the last month in DV incidents, if that happened in Dubbo, or if it happened in Launceston, or if it happened in any other town in this country of a similar size to Alice Springs, my God, it'd be, absolutely,
you'd have rallies,
everywhere.
You'd have petitions, you'd have walks on Parliament, you would have everybody banding together to say enough's enough, we do not accept this. Look,
we're going to take a really quick break. You are listening to Mix 104.9's 360. It is the week that was. Well, I tell you what, it has been a very busy hour this morning. Now, before I let you guys go, if you've just joined us, well, you've missed an hour of power, really. There's a lot going on in here. Selena Ruvo.
You've missed the commitment from the Minister to the $20,000 police retention bonus, but it is on the record.
There's been a lot to cover off. But I tell you what, someone who's not receiving funding is the Environment Centre and the Arid Lands group. They've both had their funding scrapped. I know the government making this announcement earlier in the week and doubling down on their commitment to stamp out green lawfare as well. They're terminating the taxpayer-funded support for the Environment Centre and the Arid Lands Environment Centre. $100,000, I think it is, per year for both of them. Thoughts?
Yeah, Katie, I know that people don't want to see that that term that's now just, in the last week I've learnt, which is lawfare, that green lawfare. And, we saw a very high-profile case with the Barossa gas project, and people don't want to see that. Well, they want to see development held up for the wrong reasons. And what that case found was, the integrity issue around that. But what those community groups and those organisations, especially when they're very focused on key issues like the environment, those groups are there as another layer of scrutiny for the government. So when they're defunded and then they're removed, what are the other mechanisms? That's what I've been asking this week. If you're defunding a group and that core business is to look at government regulation, policy, law, etc., who else is then holding accountable? Because we've got a job, the Labor opposition has a job, that's our job, is to hold the government to account. But when it comes to those very detailed areas like the environment, like some of our other key organisations that focus on a particular area, topic or piece of legislation that government look at, who else is keeping the government to account? And that's what we want to know. We want to know what are the mechanisms, what are the areas that Territorians
That's
can
what
feel
you're there
comfortable
for,
with.
Selena.
Yeah, I know. Absolutely, that's what I just said, Matt. That's my job. But, we're four people in opposition. Like, where are the experts in the field? Where are the experts in the environment? Where are the experts in development? Where are the experts in industry? Those are the other areas and groups that also need to ask questions about government changes.
The other question is, like, the government can't afford to be funding everybody, whether you're talking about, different environmental groups or whether you're talking about other organisations. If you can't run if you don't have a sustainable business model, whether it's that kind of organisation or another, should government funding actually be what you're reliant upon?
Well, certainly not. Look, as we said before, that there are other mechanisms to appeal these. There's been around about 18 merits reviews since 2020, and I think just there might be one or two, but the majority of those decisions have always been upheld. So this merits review is really delaying progress here in the Northern Territory. And the other mechanism that everybody doesn't talk about is that judicial review still exists. So if a proponent out there has a clear issue with that decision, if there are legal issues, if the decision is, if there's a legal error in that decision, judicial review is available for those groups to make that appeal through the courts.
Community groups can't pay for that judicial process. Like, that's the whole process. If someone's going to
I thought the
create
Environment Centre
development,
said they didn't need the money.
Yeah, I think
That's
they said
right.
they'll continue.
No,
to
they said they
operate
didn't
anyway.
want the CLP money. They didn't want the
money.
They didn't want the CLP tainted funding.
They said that they didn't want the money, and that's fine. But the reality is, what we've done is we are working towards scrapping the third-party merits review. Judicial review will always be there, and that's the avenue that these different parties can pursue.
So you have to have money to then go through a procedure. That's basically what Steve's saying.
I guess, the thing is, across the Northern Territory over recent years, we have seen major projects held up for incredibly long periods of time. I mean,
Yeah. I think the Santos Barossa case was incredibly damaging for environmentalists. I know it was the Environment Defender's Office, not the EC&T or Arid Lands that were involved, but I think it was incredibly damaging. That judgment from Justice Charlesworth was incredibly damaging for those environmental groups more generally, because I think the public, your average Joe in the public, got to see a different side of that argument and thought, these people are really taking the you-know-what. And I think that's where you've seen a sort of shift in public sentiment. And I think the $100,000 is insignificant. I think it's the government sending a signal.
Yep.
And they would argue, I guess, that this is what they were voted in to do.
Of course, the other side of it, every time there is a merits review, there's taxpayers' money at stake as well. We need to engage lawyers. We need to get that process moving as well. It's actually costing taxpayers, it's costing the economy, it's costing the proponents of those big projects, and the Santos one is a classic example. But in my electorate, for example, the Fortune Agri Singleton project, that's been on the back burner now for well over 4 years, waiting for a decision about their water licence.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. In fact, we've gone over time, as always. Never a shortage of things to talk about in here. Opposition Leader Selena Rubo, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Katie, and your listeners as well.
Thank you. Matt Cunningham from Sky News, thank you for your time.
No worries. And if any of those police officers who are now getting a $20,000 retention bonus want to buy you and I a beer, Wolfie, we'll be at the Cavalier on this afternoon.
Steve Edgington, the Minister for Health and also Alcohol Policy, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Katie, and it's great to be here. And look, I'm backing all of those police officers out there. I've served in the police force. I'm backing all the frontline correctional officers as well.
Sounds like a new police
We're
minister.
there to support all of our frontline workers, and it's great to be on the show. And good morning to all the listeners in Darwin.
Thank you.